Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Today we will dive into the amazing and inspiring story of the Buddha. His journey from being born into a royal family to attaining enlightenment shows how the pursuit of truth and deep reflection can transform not only one person, but the entire world. We will tell you about his early life, filled with luxury and security, as well as the events that changed his worldview and led to his spiritual quest. Let's dive into this story together to better understand the Buddha's teachings and learn valuable lessons for our own path. A look at the life of Buddha will bring us closer to his teaching. Buddha was born about 2,560 years ago into a royal family, and although most images depict him as an Asian, he looked more like a European. His family had moved to northern India from what is now Ukraine several centuries earlier, during the Great Migration of Peoples. Buddha belonged to the warrior caste, and the texts say that he was a tall, strong man with blue eyes. His parents' country was located on the southern border of modern Nepal, around the city of Kapilavastu. It was a surprisingly rich region of India, not suffering from overpopulation. Judging by excavations, there was an underground sewage system and central heating, which is a rarity even in modern Nepal. Buddha was not born as a result of immaculate conception for his parents. He was the last chance to find an heir to the throne and save the country from extinction. A very unusual, vivid dream announced to the mother that she was pregnant, and how great was the joy when an extremely strong, beautiful baby was born. However, gradually the father and mother began to be overcome by doubts. Many inexplicable things were happening around their son. For example, when he took his first steps, flowers grew where his foot touched the ground. This was befitting a poet, a dreamer, or a philosopher, but not a young warrior or commander holding the future of the state in his hands. And so 3 wise men were called to help predict the fate of the king's son, whom his parents had named Siddhartha Gautama. The wise men were unanimous in their judgment. The boy is truly special. If he does not come into contact with the suffering of the world, then everything you expect from him will come true. A warrior and a hero, he will conquer the neighboring kingdoms, and you will be proud of him. However, if he happens to learn that the world is conditioned and that true, eternal happiness cannot be found in it, then he will renounce everything and discover a new, enlightening vision. The parents needed a ruler, not an eccentric or an artistic genius, so they did not hesitate to take measures to provide their son with everything that any healthy young man would like. The prince was surrounded by 500 women of the most exquisite beauty. He had everything for sports and martial arts, any entertainment and the best conditions for education at his disposal, and he mastered everything quickly. The young heir only had to point to something, and he immediately received it. And since there was nothing disturbing from past lives in his subconscious, no unpleasant impressions emerged from within. Thus, the royal son spent his first 29 years, experiencing only successive levels of joy. But one day his world turned upside down. Disappointment and the search for meaning. Young Siddhartha Gautama was carefully protected from things that could darken him until he found himself outside the palace at the age of 29. The prince encountered the unpleasant sides of life quite late, but he learned everything at once. In 3 days, he came across a hopelessly ill man, overcome with suffering, then a completely decrepit and feeble old man, and finally a dead man. The realization that this suffering is an integral part of life deprived the Prince of Peace. That night, when he returned to the palace, he could not sleep, thinking all the time about the refuge he could give to his loved ones. Nothing can be truly relied upon. Fame, family, friends, wealth, all this will disappear someday. Both outside and inside there is only impermanence, nothing truly and eternally existing. The next morning Siddhartha saw a man sitting in a state of deep introspection. When their eyes met, the future Buddha was struck as if by lightning. He knew at once that he was on the right track. That which was timeless was reflected in the stranger's eyes. So the prince approached the shining mirror behind the pictures, the ocean beneath the waves. There must be a perceiver. Surely only the mind can grasp both thoughts and feelings, as well as external situations and worlds. It suddenly became clear that there must be something between ideas and impressions. Now the prince had the thread in his hands. He began to guess that he could trust only this perceiver, not the perceived, the constant, not the changing objects of perception, the mirror, not the pictures. The sight of the meditator awakened the understanding that the perceiving mind is indestructible, makes everything possible and knows everything, and that its radiant power, playing freely, allows everything to happen, and its unlimited love holds everything together. There it is. In an instant, Siddhartha realized that the unconditioned truth he was seeking was none other than his own mind. But simply knowing this was not enough. Buddha saw the goal. It was necessary to find the way to it. At that time, there were no fast lanes that allowed the spiritual path to include the circumstances of life. Love, sleep, study, driving a car, and everything else, such powerful tools were given to the world by Buddha himself after his enlightenment. The teachings, thanks to which today we can use all situations as a mirror for the mind, are called the Great Seal, in Sanskrit, Mahamudra. This is the core of the Diamond Way. So, since there was no way to live an interesting life and ride the tiger of direct experience to attain insight, the prince had no choice. He had to take the much slower path of renunciation. It made sense to limit the number of impressions coming into the mind. He ended his rich life in society abruptly, sneaking out of the palace one night into the forests and hills of northern India. He now had a great goal: to understand the timeless nature of the mind. The future Buddha was eager to fully understand the mind for the benefit of all beings and was not afraid of any exercises. He studied everything without the slightest pride. The next 6 years were very difficult, but they brought maturity. For example, one day Siddhartha went to extremes. Considering the body bad, he fasted until only a skeleton remained. The weakening of sensory impressions should sharpen the clarity of the mind. However, instead of the expected result, the prince discovered that in such a state it was impossible to be useful either to himself or to others. So he began to eat normally again, and his body regained its former strength. At that time, all the philosophical currents known today already existed in northern India, as well as in Greece, which was experiencing a spiritual flowering at about the same time. Siddhartha not only studied with outstanding teachers, but also quickly surpassed his mentors. However, their dualistic views did not bring him any closer to his goal. In all cultures, even the most gifted teachers put forward countless improvable causes for the origin of the world and all events in it, and only Buddha, as well as his European contemporary Heraclitus, found the only convincing solution. Space itself joyfully plays and contains all possibilities. Therefore, when it turned out that the next teacher knew nothing about the timeless nature of the perceiver and could not show something permanent and worthy of trust, Buddha said thank you to him, and moved on to the next famous forest guru. There was an atmosphere of extraordinary spiritual openness in India at that time, like in ancient Greece, Renaissance Italy, or the 1960s in the West. Of course, many of the best representatives of the last wave of the search for meaning fell victim to drugs, but their broad attack on authorities, prohibitions, and materialism did not pass without a trace and continues to influence the development of society to this day. The mood of the 1960s was sincerity, the desire, even if not always far-sighted, to lead all beings to happiness. High ideals, faith in the original goodness of human nature overshadowed materialism and snobbery. And although in the time of Buddha contraceptives had not yet been invented and people did not know such sexual freedom, however, in terms of depth and clarity of worldview, many listeners of that distant era were much more attentive and focused. Materialism and nihilism were widespread, as were all the views known today that try to explain events by external causes, such as gods. However, in any case and with any choice, the Indians first of all expected that their spiritual attitude would have a positive effect on their daily life. The idea that a worldview could permeate every aspect of life down to the smallest detail became alien to Western culture during the Inquisition and the unimaginable tortures and executions that accompanied it. In its place, speculative disciplines such as logic and ethics began to emerge, which were more likely to bring intellectual satisfaction than to improve everyday life. The apotheosis of this process was Descartes' separation of body and mind, which still exerts considerable influence on Western culture. The further fragmentation of the humanities into disciplines produced an incredible number of experts in various narrowly specialized fields, but only a few kept the whole of human aspiration in focus and had an understanding of the paths to happiness as well as of meaningful goals. In the age of Buddha, on the contrary, people were not yet branded with the stigma of absolutism or religious oppression and therefore expected something more from a worldview. It had to be a philosophy of life and, by going beyond personal desires and expectations, give access to timeless truth. The teaching had to have a logical basis, applicable means, and an achievable goal. In addition, everyone was extremely careful with various statements. If someone's view was refuted, the loser became the winner's disciple. Such was the spiritual honesty of the era. After 6 years of study and meditation in this then pleasant, forested lowland of northern India, the young prince had the promise of countless lifetimes. He wanted to finally understand the essence of the mind for the benefit of all beings. To realize his plan, Siddhartha chose a place called Bodh, which today is a bustling village full of Asian temples, Western tourists, Buddhists, and Indian beggars, but where a powerful force field still lingers. The area around Bodh Gaya has become quite dangerous in recent times, so it is best to visit the holy places only during daylight hours and in large groups, as you can be killed simply for your belongings and money. Bodh Gaya is located southeast of Delhi, 2/3 of the way to Calcutta in the state of Bihar, which is now hopelessly overpopulated. Arriving there, Siddhartha sat down under a large, lush tree, determined to remain in a state of self-absorption until the goal was achieved, until he was able to benefit all beings. After 6 days and nights of varied experiences, on the morning of the 7th day the prince attained enlightenment. This full moon in May, some 2,525 years ago, was his 35th birthday, and 45 years later it was the day of his death. Instantly the last veils of rigid concepts dissolved in the mind, and only the all-encompassing here and now remained. All divisions in time and space disappeared, and past, present, and future merged in a state of sparkling bliss that contained everything. Siddhartha became luminous awareness. He knew everything and was everything with every cell of his body. Instantly, the last veils of rigid concepts dissolved in the mind, and only the all-encompassing here and now remained. All divisions in time and space disappeared, and past, present, and future merged in a state of sparkling bliss that contained everything. For the first 7 weeks after the final realization, the Buddha continued to sit under a tree, apparently so that the body could get used to the enormous flows of the power of enlightenment. During this period, the gods came to him, received his blessings, and took refuge in him. Like the most gifted of men later, they saw in him not a man, but a mirror of their own Buddha nature. Thanks to the Buddha's example, they were able to turn to values that could truly be relied upon. Later, the Buddha taught his disciples to rely on 3 pillars and to take refuge in the so-called precious and rare, or 3 jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. This outer refuge is common to all schools of Buddhism. It is necessary for recognizing the mind. Whether it is given in great detail or simply by repeating a few short phrases after the teacher, the result is a connection and we find ourselves on the path to enlightenment. From then on, the conviction grows that we, like the Buddha, carry within ourselves all the enlightened qualities and will be able to discover them through his means. Although the full meaning of refuge first comes at the moment of enlightenment, its powerful positive influence begins to be felt from the very first minutes. Refuge gives a clear direction in life and greatly strengthens all our actions, and the meditations it empowers us to perform effectively remove painful impressions from the storage consciousness. And because our mind then functions more freely and flexibly, we begin to think more about others. So we take refuge in the Buddha as the goal, the full opening of the mind and the embodiment of enlightenment. This state, the indestructible, timeless nature of truth, or Buddha nature, is inherent in everyone, even if not everyone is aware of it. We also open ourselves to the Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, as the path that leads to the goal. And we need to be surrounded by people with similar values whenever possible, because we develop best when we have a connection with close friends on the path who have been liberated from suffering or who are striving to do so. They are called Sangha. This too is refuge.in. Those schools or lineages where the main emphasis is on meditation, the Buddha is considered the most important refuge. Here we try to find access to a state in which there are no more changes, and we learn, primarily with the help of the teacher, to trust this state. As for the Buddhist schools, which rely primarily on the conceptual approach, they especially emphasize refuge in the teaching, since it leads to enlightenment. Their followers approach perfection gradually and very carefully. The higher the level of methods, the more important friends on the path become, firstly, because they give us access to the teaching. Without them, we would hardly be able to use the path and reach the goal. Over time, such friends also become useful examples. In this case, they are called seekers of enlightenment or bodhisattvas. They put the development of others above their own, simultaneously gaining power over both the conditioned world and their own minds. There are two types of friends: the steadfast and fearless ones, who can always be relied upon and who lead us out of conditioned states to liberation and enlightenment, and those who are still on the path. And although the latter may still have a very athletic mind and jump up and down, their attitude is no different. They too want to become enlightened for the benefit of all. If such friends are prepared to perceive the events of their lives impersonally, we can easily accept them as fellow travelers, and then each will learn from the development of the others. For all schools of Buddhism, a goal, a path, and helpers are essential. For more than 10% of the world's population, they bring what is needed for a meaningful and independent life. Many schools also take refuge in the teacher. This is the main refuge in the Diamond Way, the form of Buddhism transmitted in Tibet, as well as in Japanese Zen and Chinese Chan Buddhism. The teacher gives direct access to the riches of enlightenment. He is also called the Lama. He must feel for all beings the same love that a mother feels for her child. From the teacher, in addition to refuge in the Buddha, the teaching, and the friends on the path, we receive the three roots of rapid growth: the blessing that awakens trust, the means that open the mind, and the protection that gives activity and turns everything into steps on the path. Thus, the teacher embodies practically all the refuges. The deeper the impact of the methods, the more important the teacher. Anyone can run. It is worth learning to drive a car with the help of a teacher, but no one can fly on their own. For all schools of Buddhism, the goal, the path, and helpers are essential. In Buddhism, as in life in general, nothing is more important than the values by which we orient ourselves. And the successors of the Buddha inform others to the extent that the students are able to understand it, that only the mind can be an unchanging refuge. We hope that the story of the Buddha has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. His life reminds us that true happiness and enlightenment lie not in external goods, but within ourselves, in our perception and understanding of the world. Each of us can find our own path to wisdom and inner peace by following the examples of great teachers. Thank you for watching and for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and lessons. Until next time.